to turn your laser sight on. Might not see me the rest of the match.
I got your 6! I'm hit! Mosquito deployed!
We have to do this now. I was just about to...
Hostile!
You're pretty athletic.
What's your block?
Best not to turn your laser sight on. Might not see me the rest of the match.
Hostile Mosquito is online.
Took a shot! Oh! Survival's always a nice surprise!
We've lost the lead.
We have to do this now.
This was justice, not revenge. I'm hit! Grenade! Still standing. Loading!
Hostiles deploy the Mosquito.
Frag out! Got one down. Changing mag. On your 6.
Enemy UAV active. The enemy holds the lead.
Swapping mags.
Clock ticking.
I'm with you. Dust it up.
Friendly UAV online.
Hostile!
Hostile Mosquito is online.
Enemy spotted! Loading!
Enemy is gaining ground. Push them back. Hostile UAV in the area.
Took a shot! Swapping mags!
Friendly UAV on station. Hostile SAE near your position.
Changing mag!
Hostiles launched the cruise missile. Enemy UAV active.
Got one down! Swapping mags! I'm hit! Semtex incoming!
What's your back?
Hostiles deploy the Mosquito.
Snipers down!
Let's clean the field of these a-holes. Right after I clean myself.
1 minute remaining.
Dusted him!
Hostile Mosquito is online.
Loading!
Hostile UAV in the area. 10 seconds remaining. Failed. Return to base.
Great
Oh man, I was unmuted.
Mary
I killed him.
on Gallows Hill.
I
as
fell
part of
down and I
witch
killed him.
trials. One of Mary Estes' primary her testimony that helped justify Mary's execution. Although she did later write a letter to the church back in 1706 apologizing I know because I've actually held that letter in my own hands. But it didn't change the cold hard fact that the Putnam name helped destroy the Esty name. Which makes it all the more awkward, as well as wildly coincidental, that the Esty brothers' new neighbor in Illinois would also hail from the same area of Ness and named Proctor Putnam. Of Ann Putnam.
Don't know who that is.
If you're like me, you were probably a little surprised to hear rumors of witch trials and sorcery so far from the colonial region of the eastern seaboard. As an Illinois boy myself, I was honestly not expecting it. But here we are, rumors and all. But as amazing as that might be, I haven't even told you all the tales we found. In fact, there's one more that needs exploring.
What does the CT and CT Realtors do? Achieve your goals.
Hourly jobs into higher paying careers.
Rumor had stirred the city into a panic. You know how it goes, right? A story begins to be told, and a sizable enough portion of the population buys into it, transforming it into something bigger.
I actually believe in witch
The king had issued a royal edict the year before that was meant
most
to
people
empty
don't
the
believe
streets
it.
of homeless people all over
Believe in them.
The rich nobility didn't want to see them anymore, and that included children. So the police had been rounding them up and taking them to places of detention.
Bro,
oh, and one other little detail.
Like,
those
if
police
ghosts are real,
paid a fee
anything could be real.
arrest. You can see how that might get out of hand, right? So the people of Paris,
Demons,
but not because
angels.
they were rejecting a royal edict. No, it was because a rumor had replaced the truth and taken control of the narrative. A rumor that said that King Louis XV had become a leper and was bathing in the blood of children to cure himself. People protested. Threats against the king were made. And looking back, the seeds of the coming revolution were planted. All because people didn't want to believe the logical truth, but instead clung to the wild, fantastical fiction.
Oh, I actually got it.
That sort of thing would never happen today. But it certainly begs us to stop and think about the power of rumor and the way in which lies and fabrications can take on a life of their own, oftentimes overpowering the truth in the courts of public opinion. And it should cause us to rightly fear those moments. Because if history is any indication, rumor can lead us down some very dark roads. I'm Aaron Mankey.
Bro.
And this is Lore.
Should have been a kill.
In June of 1779, just 3 years after the Declaration of Independence, and in the distant land
that is a body.
Men were executed for witchcraft.
That,
specifically,
bro, it looked like somebody was right there.
A number of people in a way that seemed like hoodoo magic. That's the story, anyway. But as
it was a dead body, but he was on top of it.
The story that's told
dead,
the
laying
actual
down.
Truth, sometimes
I'm over here just
roads.
like
it's
throwing, like shooting through the whole thing.
Telephone game leading
shooting at the barrel
of misunderstanding that holds the most powerful lesson of all. There's a lot we can learn from it about ourselves, about story, about folklore in general. But before all of that, there was the truth. Moreau and Manuel were enslaved men living in what is today the state of Illinois. In 1779, though, it was still in British hands, although they had only recently acquired the territory from the French, who were the first Europeans to settle the area. And home for Moreau and Manuel, at this point in time, was Cahokia. The two men knew each other from the time they spent enslaved to Frenchmen, but when he died in 1778, they were both sold off to different estates. Despite that, though, they still managed to work together. Manuel manufactured the poisons they sold, and Moreau distributed them to the clients. It was something they had done for years and had developed a reputation for. The events of 1779 kicked off when two other enslaved people approached them with a request. This couple had been suffering through horrible abuse from their slave owners, Monsieur and Madame Nicole. The exact request that they had for Moreau and Manuel was to make their mistress gentle. So
maybe it's just the gun
instead
itself.
of making the Nicoles more gentle, it killed them. And that's not what the clients had asked for. And from everything that I've read about their story, it seems that this was the last straw for the others around them. They had been turning a blind eye to all sorts of similar slip-ups, including prior murders by poison. So Manuel and Moreau were taken into custody and put on trial. You know the rest. Like I said a moment ago, they were executed for their crimes. And that's when the rumors started, because it was really easy for people to hear about two Afro-Caribbean men being put to death for mixing potions and elixirs, and walk away thinking that they were witches, even when they weren't. It probably didn't help that their original sentence was to be burned at the stake. The judge, a French magistrate, mind you, had simply demanded a cruel enough punishment to match the cruelty of their crimes. Soon after, though, a colonial court stepped in and changed their sentence to death by hanging. Things got worse a century later, when one historian in Illinois stumbled upon some records about the trial. He misinterpreted some of the notes of court documents and published a report
they were
with those buzzwords of witchcraft and necromancy. Overnight, the country was introduced to what was said to be Illinois' first and only witchcraft execution, legally sanctioned by the courts, no less. And everyone bought the story. Even Theodore Roosevelt fell for it. In his 18
I would understand if it was like a demon.
About the case using phrases like,
but witches are not really demons.
And burnt and hanged for witchcraft in accordance with the laws and with the decision of the proper courts. To this
witches,
day,
they were just misaccused.
Heard of the trial of Manuel and Moreau, and they've only ever been told that the two men were burned and hanged by the state for being Illinois' first necromancers. It's a version of history that's clearly a lot more alluring than a story about a couple of poisoners.
Necromancers, though,
Manuel and Moreau. Their executions were no different from any other murderer of the time. Lives were lost, and two men were executed for murder. That's the truth at the heart of the story. But rumors, it seems, never die. And as the years have gone on, Illinois began to add names to the list of witches who haunt the state. Whether based on actual, factual people, or conjured
once I get used to this game maps, I could be.
To find out, they've left us with some terrifying tales.
I would just be better. Like Modern Warfare 2, I wasn't that good at the game. I would just non-stop die over and over again. I would miss all my shots. Like, when I'm new to, the game, I'll miss all my
People
shots.
of Williamson County called her Eva Locker, and said
if it's a new game, I'll miss all my shots.
Or maybe it was David Prairie, and they first started telling stories about her back in the early 1800s.
I'm not used to, the controls,
One local
basically. Well, I am used to the controls, I'm just
claimed that
not used to the maps.
1818 to 1835, there were many great
I see somebody, I'm just...
And Eva Locker was chief among them. And as you might expect, the stories about her have only grown in scope and power over the years. So what was she known for? Well, she apparently kept a towel hanging on her porch that she could milk like a cow. And when she did, it would magically pull milk from neighboring farms, leaving those farmers with no milk of their own. They also said that she killed local cattle by shooting them with hairballs. What sort of weapon fires that kind of ammunition, I have no idea, but the people they would cut a dead cow and find these hairballs in their stomach. Of course, these are better known as bezoars, and they are incredibly common things. But sure, blame them on Eva Locker, I guess. And when she got out of hand, it seems that there was no one else in the county that had the power to stand up to her. When that happened, it said that locals went to a preacher named Charlie Lee in the next county over, who had a way of combating Eva's magic. How? Well, by shooting a photo of her with a silver bullet in a ceremony that had all the pomp and circumstance of a funeral. Eva Locker from...
Why does that have to be me?
Might not have been a real person. Charlie Lee, however, was. But whether or not his silver bullet worked to cure her victims, well, I think I'll leave it to you to believe whatever you choose. And then there was Black Annie. She was known to the locals of Mount Vernon, a small city in southern Illinois, as far back as 1866. That's when dairy farmers in the area started to notice the figure of a mysterious woman in black hanging around their fields and barns. And yes, stories that mix witches and cows are pretty common, and for good reason. When your livelihood depends on your livestock, and especially your cattle, you're bound to project some wild fears onto them.
Target down.
Those sightings were followed by a panic over milk supplies, leading to Illinois' first, and I quote, dairy war. And don't ask, I have no idea what that means.
Good work.
February 19th of 1888, almost 22 years
Let's
after
go,
her
in
first
first
appearance,
place.
she was back. And this time her arrival coincided with something tragic. A tornado. When the twister was done, it left half
That's
of Mount
me
Vernon's
right there,
population
with my
homeless,
aim.
with 450 buildings totally destroyed,
Everywhere.
and nearly 40 people lost their lives. So when rumors began to spread that Black Annie, known this time as Cyclone Annie, had been spotted walking through the wreckage in a black dress and matching veil, people panicked. It didn't help that the flattened building she had been spotted near was the local grade school. Then, in 1918, a third scare seemed to grip the city. This time, locals claimed that Black Annie was chasing them through the streets. Whether they were walking in pairs, riding on horseback, or in a carriage, it didn't matter. Annie would appear out of nowhere and run after them, her black gown and veil flowing in the warm summer air, something that must have frightened those who experienced it.
Yeah,
And Mount
I was
Vernon
running
wasn't
for my
alone in
life.
their panic. A figure similar to Black Annie appeared in the Illinois town of Lebanon in 1921, right down to that vintage black dress and veil. In the 1930s, people in the town of Carlisle reported spotting a woman in a black dress following them from the shadows after dark. Naturally, people were left terrified by these
Yeah, I would
stories.
be terrified.
And one final note here. Black Annie might not have been a real woman, but the stories are deeply traditional. It seems that there are similar figures in British folklore that appear in print as far back as the 1600s. And their names? Black Annis, Black Agnes, Black Anna, and Black Annie with a Y. In a lot of ways, her legend is similar to that of La Llorona, especially how it became a tool for warning children to behave and not play outside in the dark. In the end, though, all of them were just rumors. Yes, the details around them might have been true, the dairy wars and the tornado of 1888, for example. But these legendary witches themselves seem to have only existed on the lips of the locals, not the pages of history. The only blood in their veins, it seems, was rumor. But Illinois still has more tales to give up. And if one event from the 1950s has anything to teach us, it's that rumor can cause people to do terrible things. Sometimes the wide-open landscape of Illinois can become a vacuum that pulls in all sorts of folklore and rumor. All it takes is a fear, a doubt, or some unexplainable experience to set the event in motion. And in the winter that spanned 1849 into 1850, that's exactly what happened. James Spiva and his wife, Rue May, lived in McDonough County in western Illinois, along with their 7 children. They owned and farmed a big 40-acre tract of land near Hogwallow Creek, but it wasn't a luxurious existence. Life was rough, the work was hard, and the rewards were few. James had a brother, William, who owned his own 200 acres nearby, where he lived with his wife, Phoebe. And James's wife, Rue May, had relatives in the area too. Charles Friend and Abel Friend were farmers just like them, and all of them, the families of James, William, and the Friend brothers, all attended church together in the home of Abel and his wife, Elizabeth. Okay, that's the cast of characters, and I know that's a lot to keep track of, but tragedy is rarely built on a simple foundation, and we're going to need most of these players for the events to make sense. In the winter of 1849, James Spiva came down with a sickness. He was feeling weak and empty, both of which were making him cranky and frustrated. It was so bad that he wasn't able to do the farm work that his family depended on for survival. But that wasn't the only unfortunate turn of events for James. That same winter, his favorite dog passed away. His cows weren't producing milk like they used to, and some of his other livestock had simply gone missing. Now, today we might blame that on a number of reasonable causes. Bad weather, illnesses that cause the animals to wander off and die, that sort of thing. But this was a deeply isolated area, nearly impassable under huge amounts of snow. Isolation and fear are a powerful elixir. But James talked to his brother William about it, and the two men came up with an explanation that made sense to them. James had been bewitched. The proof was his exhaustion, which both of them believed came from James being transformed into an animal each night and forced to attend a witch's Sabbath. And who was that witch? Well, it seemed that the wife of their neighbor, Abel Friend, Elizabeth, was also mysteriously exhausted and unwell, so bad that she was confined to her bed. They decided that she wasn't really sick at all, just resting from all those wild nights at the Sabbath gatherings. But luckily for James, William was more than just his brother or a farmer. He was also a witch doctor. So he had James do something odd. He instructed him to carve an image of Elizabeth on a tree and then shoot it with a silver bullet. And James, desperate for relief from his affliction, did exactly that. The next day, February 23rd of 1850, James was outside chopping wood, something that I assume was a sign that the ritual might have worked, and a neighbor passed by and mentioned the local gossip. Elizabeth Friend had passed away that very morning. "Oh, I knew that," James replied. "I killed her. She was a witch, and I shot her with a silver bullet." And as you might imagine, hearing someone confess to murder so readily, I doubt they believe the witchcraft part, but the actual confession, that was pretty damning. As a result, a few days later, James Spiva was arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Friend. Clearly, when he stood before a justice on April 4th, James explained the misunderstanding and everyone laughed it off. Right? Well, not exactly. James apparently stuck to his wild story, so Justice Tridwell officially charged him with murder. He was immediately sentenced to be hanged, although that seems to have been altered shortly after. Death by firearm, a death similar to his claimed killing of Elizabeth, was his new punishment, according to old court documents, right down to being lined up against a tree. As the story goes, however, as James was being placed against that tree, a lawyer happened to be passing by and asked Justice Tridwell what was going on. Then he informed the judge that since James was not a Christian, the more just thing to do would be to let him go home and prepare to meet God. While James was at home, though, it seems the sheriff had a change of heart, and the execution never took place. Soon enough, the matter was forgotten, and James went back to life on the farm. Crisis averted. The end. Right? Sort of. That is until 1855, when James felt that he had once again been bewitched by someone near him. Elizabeth Friend was dead, though, so who was his new enemy? Once again, he asked his brother William, and once again, William had a suspect. It was James's own wife, Mw3. At this point, one of the brothers remembered a bit of old witch folklore. It was said that you could break a witch's spell by scratching her face and drawing blood. So William suggested that James wait until his wife was sleeping and then give her a little cut on the forehead with a knife. Heck, she might not even notice, he told him. So that's what James did. Fueled by fear and empowered by folklore, he crept toward his sleeping wife and placed the knife against her face. But Mw3 felt it and suddenly sat up, causing the blade to cut a deep gash down the length of her cheek. It was enough to cause her to go to the authorities and accuse James of murder. He was even arrested and put on trial, spending time in the county jail. But in the end, he was found not guilty. Upon his release, James apparently skipped town, moving as far away as possible. 3 years later, Mw3 filed for divorce. She was thankfully able to move on from such a troubled and paranoid man, but she would carry the scar on her face for the rest of her life. A living reminder of the dangerous power of rumor. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. For anyone growing up in the 90s, as the online world became the new frontier, that was the common warning from parents and friends. Just because it was typed out on a page or a screen didn't necessarily make it true. That tendency, though, to believe anything sensational enough to cause people to skip over the due diligence of basic research and fact-checking wasn't new to the 90s. It's still with us today, and we can also find it plastered across the pages of history. Rumors have always been more appealing than the truth, and far more viral. But here's a truth that's wild enough to be worthy of spreading around at parties and on social media. Witchcraft is still technically illegal in Illinois, and is punishable by death. How is that possible? Well, it has to do with those old world connections in the pre-United States version of Illinois. Back in February of 1819, the Illinois state legislature wanted to make sure that all state laws were built on the same foundation as the original 13 colonies, a principle known as English common law. It was smart in a way, ensuring that all the laws of one state didn't stand in direct opposition to the laws of another. But it also meant inheriting the flaws that came with it, flaws like the 1604 Witchcraft Act. Now, England repealed the act in 1736, but Illinois has never formally done the same. In fact, in 1874, they passed the same law all over again, just with some new formatting and clarification. But the felony charge connected to witchcraft made it through the revision, and it's still on the books today. Thankfully, though, it's never been enforced. Should any of the Illinois witches that we talked about today have actually been real, they might have found themselves in some legal hot water. And so might another pair of families. You see, in 1837, another pair moved to Illinois, all the way from New England. Brothers Avery and Moses settled in Warren Township and began new lives in the growing area. And a few years later, in 1842, another man, also from New England, did the same thing, moving in just a few miles down the road from the brothers. Both households not only came from the same region, but the same state, Massachusetts, and their connection, unbeknownst to them, ran much deeper than a few miles of Illinois roadway. You see, back in 1692, Moses and Avery's great-great-great-grandmother, Mary Esty, was hanged on Gallows Hill as part of the Salem witch trials. One of Mary Esty's primary accusers, by the way, was a young Ann Putnam Jr. It was her testimony that helped justify Mary's execution, although she did later write a letter to the church back in 1706 apologizing for her role in the tragedy. I know because I've actually held that letter in my own hands, but it didn't change the cold hard fact that the Putnam name helped destroy the Esty name, which makes it all the more awkward, as well as wildly coincidental, that the Esty brothers' new neighbor in Illinois would also hail from the same area of Massachusetts, a man named Proctor Putnam, the great-great-great-nephew of Ann Putnam. If you're like me, you were probably a little surprised to hear rumors of witch trials and sorcery so far from the colonial region of the eastern seaboard. As an Illinois boy myself, I was honestly not expecting it, but here we are, rumors and all. But as amazing as that might be, I haven't even told you all the tales we found. In fact, there's one more that needs exploring. Stick around through this brief sponsor break, and I'll tell you all about it. This episode of Lore was sponsored by Stamps.com. You know what's about to happen, right? That surge in orders for the holiday season? I can feel it coming in my bones like a storm. But don't worry, I'm ready, thanks to Stamps.com. The holiday rush might mean more mailing and shipping for your business, but it doesn't mean that you have to have more stress, because Stamps.com has been helping businesses like yours save time and money for 25 years, and it can help you get ready for the holiday ramp-up. With Stamps.com, all you need is a computer and a printer. They even send you a free scale, so you have everything you need to get started. And now, taking care of orders on the go is even easier with the Stamps.com mobile app. And all of this while getting access to huge carrier discounts of up to 84% off USPS and UPS rates, and the USPS and UPS services that you need right from your computer, anytime, day or night, no lines, no traffic, no waiting. Oh, and if you need a package pickup, you can easily schedule it through your Stamps.com dashboard. And if you sell products online, Stamps.com seamlessly connects with every major marketplace and shopping cart. Get your business ready for the holiday rush. Get started with Stamps.com today. Sign up with the promo code LORE for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the page, and enter the code LORE. Stamps.com. Never go to the post office again. This episode was also made possible by Simply Safe. Well, it's official. Fall is here. And if you're like me, you're settling back into a busier routine with the kids at school and spare time filled up with soccer practices and seasonal activities. Your home may be sitting empty and vulnerable. And that's why I recommend Simply Safe Home Security and the revolutionary home monitoring innovation 24/7 Live Guard Protection. It's designed to help stop crime in real time. Now, if an intruder breaks into your home, Simply Safe professional monitoring agents can actually see, speak to, and deter them through Simply Safe's new Smart Alarm wireless indoor camera. Simply Safe's 24/7 LiveGuard protection and the new Smart Alarm indoor camera work seamlessly as part of the Simply Safe system to keep your whole home safe from break-ins, fires, floods, and more. I use and love Simply Safe on a daily basis, and I can't recommend it highly enough. From setup to the daily operation, it's been wonderful. Although probably my favorite feature is the ability to use the app to check in through their amazing cameras. It truly is simple and always solid. Plus, you can install it yourself in about 30 minutes, or have a Simply Safe expert set it up for you. Either way, it's easy to protect your home. For a limited time, get 20% off your new system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Visit simplysafe.com/lore. That's simplysafe.com/lore. There's no safe like Simply Safe. And finally, this episode was made possible by Squarespace. It's natural to want to show off the creative things you make. I know that all the talented folks who work with me at Grim and Mild are proud of all the shows they help build, and they deserve a showcase for all that hard work that's just as amazing. And for that, I turn to Squarespace. Build the perfect websites. Their new asset library feature lets me save all the necessary images like the cover art for all my shows and have them available across the Squarespace platform. Their fluid engine is the easiest way to build a website, hands down. Start with the best-in-class website templates and customize every design detail with reimagined drag-and-drop technology for desktop and mobile. And they even offer the ability to sell products in an online store. Whether you sell physical, digital, or even service products, Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. So, what are you waiting for? Build your new website today. Just visit squarespace.com/lore to start your free trial website. And when you're ready to launch it, use the offer code LORE at checkout to save 10%. Squarespace. Build something beautiful. It's often the newspaper headline that helps give birth to the rumor, isn't it? This one, from the New York Times no less, seemed to sum everything up. It read, "A couple of frisky young females." But rather it's causing a stink in high society. This article was about something taking place way out in Illinois. In fact, this story, one that seemed to enthrall big city readers everywhere, took place on a farm. The Williams family lived in Franklin County, down in the southern tip of the state. In fact, the community they lived in was known as Fitz Hill, which might have been a bit of foreshadowing, as you're about to find out. And it all began on April 1st of 1871. That was the day both of James Williams' daughters began acting strangely. True to the way the press worked back then, the girls, 16 and 18 years old at the time, are never actually named, so we don't know their full, true identity. But what they did that spring certainly made them a household name. It would begin the same way each evening. After a completely normal day of working, talking, laughing, and more, their behavior would change as the sun dipped below the horizon. All at once, both girls would drop everything they were doing and break into an all-out run in a straight line away from the family home. When they reappeared minutes later, they would both bound and leap up onto the roof of the house, where they performed all sorts of dangerous, complex acrobatics along the roof line. The only things interrupting this odd behavior were their unnatural screams that they bellowed out as they did it, and of course, their fits. According to multiple witnesses, the girls would be balancing along the very peak of the roof when all of a sudden they would be struck with violent seizures, again, at the exact same time. Sometimes these fits would cause them to go perfectly still, like statues, and yet not fall off or lose their balance. You know how communities can be too. The moment word began to spread about the unusual feats of these two sisters, folks began to walk over and watch them, or travel by horse, even by carriage. Soon there were regular crowds of over 200 people, all entranced by the supernatural acrobatics of the Williams sisters. On top of all of that, pun maybe partially intended here if I'm honest, the sisters began to do other things too. They spoke in a language that no one else could understand. They had a habit of capturing flies and eating them live out of their hands, sometimes to the point that it caused them to vomit. And their movements, even on the ground, had a choreographed quality, as if they were both just puppets, controlled by the same invisible master. Now, I know what you're thinking. How long did it take for someone to accuse them of being witches, right? But that's not what happened. Instead, these young ladies turned that idea around and claimed that it was they who had been bewitched. Their initial sprint each evening, they claimed, was the doing of the witch who tormented them, causing them to run to her house each evening. That June, the girls claimed, in the daytime when they could speak freely, that they were being tortured by a local woman who was an evil witch, but they were unable to speak her name. According to them, if they were to identify this witch to the authorities, she would choke them and cause more fits. There's no record of what ultimately happened to the Williams sisters, which is more than a little frustrating. Their story was covered in all sorts of far-off newspapers, but the opinions were rather mixed. Up in Chicago, for example, the Chicago Tribune called it a good old-fashioned case of witchcraft. But elsewhere, such as Tennessee, there were doubts, like when the Nashville Union and American blamed their behavior on, and I quote, some villainous quack doctor. The best guess as to their true identity, according to the work of researcher and author Michael Kleen, is that their names were Mary and Susan, but no one is really sure. To this day, their story remains a mystery, wrapped in folklore and fueled by rumor. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mankey, with research by Cassandra De Alba and Taylor Hagerdorn, and music by Chad Lawson. Lore is much more than just a podcast. There's a book series available in bookstores and online, and 2 seasons of the television show on Amazon Prime Video. Check them both out if you want more lore in your life. Information about all of that and more is available over at lorepodcast.com. And you can also follow the show on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and then click that follow button. And when you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening.
Across the country, Amazon employees are turning hourly jobs into higher-paying careers.
I don't think there's that many opportunities, especially where you can start off working at the warehouse to working in tech.
Learn more at aboutamazon.com.
Electrify your next holiday adventure with a new Jeep Wrangler 4xE or Grand Cherokee 4xE. Whether you choose the most planet-friendly Wrangler ever or the most capable Grand Cherokee ever, you'll discover the freedom of power both on and off the road. No matter how you choose to charge forward, the choice is clear for your next electric SUV. Hurry in to save big with our best deals of the season at your local Connecticut dealership during the Black Friday sales event.
Unfortunately, problems plagued jungle habitat almost immediately. Months after it first opened, a tourist named Abraham Levy took a taxi through the safari while on a visit from Israel. He wasn't satisfied with how far away some of the animals were, so he rolled down his window for a closer look. A pair of lions caught sight of the open window and literally pounced on the opportunity, mauling him across his face and arms. He eventually accepted his responsibility in the attack, but the incident had tarnished jungle habitat's reputation permanently. Months later, news broke out that several of the animals had escaped and were living in the woods of West Milford. Residents spotted the occasional peacock or ostrich in their backyards, even a kangaroo. But more threatening predators had also found their way outside the park. One local came out to his car one morning only to find an Alaskan timber wolf standing on top of it. The animals that didn't get out were either shipped to a care facility in Ohio or died from exposure. Many of the animals, such as the baboons and turtles, weren't made for the harsh New Jersey winters. Monkeys lost fingers and toes to frostbite, while the tortoises died in the cold. A baby elephant carcass was also found in the woods by passing hikers. Its head had been separated from its body. All of these problems, compounded with protests from local residents who didn't like all the added traffic the park brought, eventually forced Warner Brothers to close jungle habitat for good. The site was left to decompose as nature slowly reclaimed it for itself. Those who visit the former park today can find rusted animal cages and tracks from the old tram system. But that's not all. Over the years, folks in West Milford have claimed to have spotted evidence of the creatures that were left behind nearly 50 years ago. Shortly after the park closed, it said that more animal carcasses were discovered. They were described as though they had been picked clean by something with big, sharp teeth, like a wolf or a hungry lion that had slipped away when no one was looking. The animals that had managed to get away were said to have done more than escape. They proliferated. Hybrids, such as albino wolf dogs, are said to lurk among the trees and forests of West Milford, as do more unexplainable phenomena. A woman cruising along Clinton Road with her friends once spotted a large animal approaching her car. They took off, racing away from it as fast as possible, until they were finally pulled over by a police officer. The creature, of course, had vanished, but the stories didn't go away. Those who knew of its presence referred to it as a hellhound. Some even said that it was the Jersey Devil itself. Regardless of who or what it was, though, one thing is certain. It's a jungle out there, and you never know what might be watching you. This episode of Lore Legends was produced by me, Aaron Mankey, with research and writing by Harry Marks. Lore is much more than just a podcast. There's a book series available in bookstores and online, and 2 seasons of the television show on Amazon Prime Video. Check them both out if you want more lore in your life. For video fans, Lore is also on YouTube. Each new episode is released alongside the podcast, but in talking head-style video formats. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. And you can also follow this show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and click that follow button. And when you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening. In an age-old story, Peggy was a single mom with 4 kids under her roof. Margaret was 13, Janet was 11, Johnny was 10, and Billy was 7. And it was the middle two, Janet and Johnny, that first brought the problem to Peggy's attention. They came into her bedroom on the night of August 30th to tell her that their beds had been shaking uncontrollably. Peggy didn't believe them, though, and told them to go back to bed. But the following night, their cries brought her into their room to discover something unexplainable. At first, it was just the sounds of knocking from somewhere else in the room, but that was quickly interrupted by a chest of drawers sliding across the room without anyone touching it. Peggy didn't know what to do, and honestly, who could blame her? So she called her neighbors, a couple named Vic and Gary Nottingham, who came over and walked through the house with her. They heard all the same knocking sounds and were so frightened that they called the police. And the police? They had the same strange encounters there. The officers claimed to see a chair move across the living room floor a distance of roughly 4 feet without anyone coming near it. Drawers in the furniture opened and closed, objects like silverware and boxes jumped on their own, and that constant knocking was ever present. So as the 80s song asks, who are you going to call? The Society for Psychical Research, of course. Because despite fading in popularity over the years, they were still around and well known enough to be seen as a resource. So investigators Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair showed up to look into the matter. For the next year, the pair would visit the household roughly every other day, even spending the night every couple of weeks to hold vigil with the family. And over that dedicated period, both men became convinced that while many of the kids were having some paranormal experiences, the main focus was clearly on 11-year-old Janet. What's more, Janet began speaking in another person's voice. Swore at the investigators and told them all about who he was and why he was there. Apparently he used to live in the house, but had died there in a chair. Later, in conversation with the neighbors, it was revealed that someone had indeed died in a chair in the house years before. The haunting continued for many more months. Fires spontaneously started in the house, and cameras would malfunction when trying to capture evidence. In January of 1978, older sister Margaret started vocalizing as well, but it was infrequent and not as convincing. And then, all of the activity began to wind down. Playfair and Gross went on to write up their observations and experiences in a book they published in 1980 called This House is Haunted, an investigation of the Enfield poltergeist. And while their story has drawn a lot of critics who think the events were all faked, many disagree. To some, it's just a matter of science whether it's true or not. To most, though, it's a matter of faith. But whether or not it was all real, the story has gone on to influence countless others who are fascinated by poltergeist activity, most notably Hollywood. And you can see that influence in a horror film that came out just a few years ago. The 2016 film, The Conjuring 2. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mahnke, with research by Cassandra De Alba and music by Chad Lawson. Lore is much more than just a podcast. There's a book series available in bookstores and online, and 2 seasons of the television show on Amazon Prime Video. Check them both out if you want more lore in your life. Information about all of that and more is available over at lorepodcast.com. And you can also follow this show on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and then click that follow button. And when you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening.
I caught him shredding down that slope like a second ago.
What? He hasn't snowboarded a day in his life.
Yeah, but his fit is really nice.
Dad knows what's up, and so do you. New England Ski and Scuba is running low this season on rentals, so get yours today. Plus, they've extended the 20% off sale on ski pants and jackets, so get them before they're gone. Only at New England Ski and Scuba. You've got Ride, Burton, K2, Oakley, and so many more brands to choose from. New England Ski and Scuba, 60 Windsor Avenue in Vernon, and NewEnglandSkiAndScuba.com.
Hey folks, Aaron here. Before we start today's creepy episode, which is a great one by the way, all about the favorite hometown legends from my Grim and Mild teammates, I was crossing the street. Click on the microphone at the top of the page and enter the code LORE. Stamps.com. Never go to the post office.
Ooh, Monsters of the Woods.
Lore Legends, a subset of lore episodes that explore the strange tales we whisper in the dark, even if they can't always be proven by the history books. So if you're ready, let's begin. The woods can be one of the most peaceful and tranquil places you'll ever find. The sounds of songbirds and squirrels going about their life overhead, invisible creatures in the underbrush, the rustle of leaves in the wind. You get the idea. It can feel almost magical, as though the world around you just melts away. In the woods, there are no bills, no groceries, no commutes, no traffic jams. There's only the quiet contemplation that arises when nature replaces all distraction. But when night falls and the moon casts its pale glow, those trees can loom tall, like monsters, complete with gnarled arms and sharpened claws. In the dark, the woods feel a whole lot different. They take on a more sinister color in the absence of light, where every animal scurrying in the shadows and every cracked twig could mean your demise. As Robert Frost once wrote, the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. But in those depths are things we cannot see, sounds we can't explain. Our ears and minds play tricks on us. Was that simply the cry of a fox, or the scream of someone being murdered 100 yards away? The forest at night is where our imaginations run wild with thoughts of what could be lurking in the shadows. Yes, the woods can be lovely, dark, and deep, but after hearing the next 4 stories, I doubt you'll ever sleep again. I'm Aaron Mahnke, and this is Lore Legends. In the woods of Slavic countries, like Russia, Slovakia, and Poland, there is a spirit. He's been called many things over the centuries. Les Pravadni, which means righteous one of the forest, or Mishko Velnias, the forest devil. But most commonly he goes by a simple 5-letter name, Leshy, which translates as he from the forest. Leshy is something of a Russian Lorax who protects the forest and its animals. He's often spotted alongside gray wolves and bears and tells the birds when it's time to migrate for the season. Those who wish to do harm to the forest or its denizens have been met with his wrath. Loggers and hunters have either gone missing or been unsuccessful in their hunts because they have not appeased Leshy, who does not ask for much. Hunters, for example, must promise not to kill more than Leshy has allowed, and they can only hunt on specific days. Leshy's punishments for deviating from those rules can vary, from being whipped with the tops of the trees to being stricken with a severe illness. So, how does one make a promise to a forest spirit? Well, one hunter took off his cross and swore allegiance to Leshy before giving him the Holy Communion that he intended to take for himself. Although it wasn't uncommon for local peasants to furrow their eyebrows at the men who prayed to Leshy with such fervor, these peasants sometimes believed the hunters and herdsmen who did so wielded occult powers over the forest as well. According to folklorists, some forests are home to multiple Leshies that will fight over their domains, and the effects of these battles can be seen in felled trees and frightened animals. Windstorms and hurricanes have also been blamed on such Leshy fights, with activity much higher in the spring. But not all Leshy activity is destructive. Some say they hibernate in the winter, while others believe that they die each autumn. After winter, as the ground thaws, they are reborn. Some who have encountered him in the forest claim to have heard him singing, laughing, or whistling among the trees, and he has a reputation among many as a prankster. Just don't anger him. He carries with him a weapon to let the other woodland creatures know that he is in charge. It's been said that a mushroom's wrinkles are the result of Leshy whipping at its cap. Now, if the stories are true, forest visitors who have angered the Leshy have not fared well against him, with some not even living to tell the tale. He's been known to lure unsuspecting trespassers, usually children, in a few different ways. One is by mimicking the voices of their parents and siblings. Another is by shifting into a different form entirely, like that of a tree or a mushroom or an animal, or even a half-human, half-plant hybrid. His true form, though, varies depending on the tale and who is telling it. In some versions, he has horns on his head and cloven feet, with shoes that are worn on the wrong feet. And no matter where the sun casts its rays, he never casts a shadow. Others say that he bears a more human appearance, with no eyebrows or eyelashes. In this form, he is old and withered with a pointy head and no right ear. He may also have long green hair or fur all over his body. Oh, and his eyes occasionally glow. And still, there is a legend that paints the Leshy as a giant, who is so large that his eyes are like the stars, and he tromps through the forest causing the wind to blow. To touch him is to feel skin like a tree's bark, dyed blue because of the color of the blood flowing through his veins. And once he leaves his domain, he shrinks back down, no taller than a blade of grass. Now, after all of that, you might think that the Leshy is a solitary creature. His only friends, the flora and fauna around him, right? But he's said to have a wife named Leshachika, and children as well, called Leshonki. Leshachika may be a cursed kidnapped or a fallen woman who has gone to live with the Leshy, and their children, on the other hand, might be their own, or they could be the children of locals who have wandered into the forest, never to be seen again. Some of those children could be unbaptized babies that have been plucked from their parents by the Leshy, but there is a way to get someone back. All a person has to do is leave food at a crossroad in the forest. It must be wrapped in cloth and tied up with a red string. And still, even those who have been taken by the Leshy can escape if they refuse to eat what he offers. Now, all of this sounds terrifying, although it's possible the stories of the Leshy were designed to keep children from wandering into the woods unattended. But the spirit isn't all bad. He can even be friendly, sharing the secrets of forest magic with those who befriend him. And if that's your plan, you've got some work cut out for you. Summoning a Leshy, it seems, requires the cutting down of young birch trees and forming a circle with their tops pointing toward the center. Then you must remove any Christian symbols you might be wearing, stand in the center of the circle, and call out for him. Once he arrives, offer him eggs, salted pancakes, or pipe tobacco. things you might have on you, and you might find yourself on the receiving end of some gifts of your own. And should you anger him in any way, simply make him laugh by putting your clothes on inside out or backwards, or wear your shoes on the wrong feet. Or, to banish him for good, you can throw salt on a fire or make the sign of the cross, either of which will send it away for good. The Leshy is, according to the stories, a cunning spirit, capable of great generosity or vicious retribution. So, if you want my recommendation, it's probably best to stay on his good side if you dare to enter the woods. And when you do, make sure you bring a snack. Monsters are everywhere. In the United States, for example, there is another kind of spirit, one that has continued to plague the people living in the hills of Frederick County, Maryland, for generations, and its reputation can be summed up with one frightening word: Snallygaster. It's a name that supposedly comes from the German phrase Schnellgeist, meaning fast ghost or quick spirit. Frederick County was a major destination for German immigrants dating all the way back to the 1730s. Many scholars, though, think that the Snallygaster legend is more of a hybrid, comprised of both Native American and Pennsylvania Dutch elements, with a dash of mountain man lore for good measure. Now, if you find yourself wandering around Frederick County, you might see hex signs, such as a 7-pointed star, placed on barns and in the area. These are allegedly meant to ward off the beast. But what exactly is a Snallygaster? Although descriptions vary, it's most commonly said to be part reptile, part bird, and according to one article in the Evening Sun back in 1909, as big as a dirigible. Its wingspan can stretch up to 14 feet wide, and is said to have a metallic beak with razor-sharp teeth inside. On the ends of its feet are talons made of hot, glowing metal, and in the center of its forehead, a single red eye. The Snallygaster has also been depicted with tentacles protruding from its mouth, like some eldritch horror from the pages of Lovecraft. Its keen sense of smell is only matched by the unpleasant odor emanating from its hulking body. Now, it's said to be as old as the Jersey Devil, both of them born in 1735, if you're keeping track, although the earliest newspaper reports on the Snallygaster only date back to 1909. That year, the Middletown Valley Register published an article about the spirit, stating that a man had been seized by the winged teeth into his jugular, drain his body of blood, and casually drop him off a hillside. One local even said that he took a shot at the monster, but the bullet bounced off. Local papers continued to run stories about the Snallygaster after that, even claiming that Teddy Roosevelt, who was about to wrap up his second term as president, was coming to Maryland to hunt for the creature himself. And one eyewitness reported that they spotted something yellow and roughly the size of a barrel nestled in the hills, and believed that it was a Snallygaster egg. Sightings of the creature were quite common, with witnesses unafraid to talk about their interactions with it. One man said that the Snallygaster spoke to him, saying, "My, I'm dry. I haven't had a good drink since I was killed in the Battle of Chickamauga." This was, according to the man, after it had swallowed roughly 100 gallons of water meant to fuel the boilers of the local brick plant. Oh, and the Battle of Chickamauga, that was a massive Union defeat during the Civil War, a battle that had taken place over 600 miles away. Another report claimed that a group of men had engaged in a heated battle with the Snallygaster outside the Emmitsburg train station in March of 1909. The skirmish lasted an hour and a half, with the beast now able to breathe fire after eating from a coal bin. Some said that the local game warden, a guy named Norman Hoke, had shown the Snallygaster his badge and ordered it to leave the county immediately before the group chased it into the woods, where it remained for several decades. Snallygaster sightings quieted down for a while after that, until November of 1932, when Maryland newspapers began publishing sensational and mildly sarcastic articles about it. Baltimore's Evening Sun newspaper ran one tongue-in-cheek report claiming the creature had been seen wearing water wings and riding a bicycle. That same paper also published what they advertised as the scoop of the decade, the first published close-up of the Bovolopus Snallygaster. Bovolopus, if you're curious, is a nonsense word, often associated with the Snallygaster, meant to add a scientific flair to the reports. And as for the photo they published, it depicted what looked like a dragon riding a penny farthing, not as menacing as the eyewitness statements would have you believe. By December of that year, reports of the Snallygaster's demise were everywhere. One paper reported that it had been shot down, when in reality all that had been injured was a large owl. Another account claimed that the Snallygaster had been attracted to the smell of a 2,500-gallon vat of moonshine in the small town of Frog Hollow. Upon flying over its alluring fumes, the creature was overcome by the scent of the alcohol and fell out of the sky and into the vat, where it drowned. Conveniently, Prohibition agents had been tipped off about the moonshining operation and arrived on the scene not long after. They found that the Snallygaster was nothing more than a skeleton, its flesh having been eaten away by the high quantity of lye in the illegal hooch. Of course, these articles and reports were not simply about a wild flying reptile run amok. They'd also been written with a strong political undercurrent. The very first Snallygaster article didn't mince words. It stated that the so-called vampire devil only attacked people of color. Were these articles trying to frighten African Americans out of Maryland? Well, quite the opposite, actually. They were more of a warning that politicians were working against their best interests, hence the slang term used to describe unscrupulous politicians at the time, Snallygaster. Like I said, monsters are everywhere, and I challenge any of you to find one that seems more American than the Snallygaster. But with that said, I'm not sure what's scarier, the vampire devils in the sky, or the next one on our list, the Hodag. "900 miles away, in the dense forest of Wisconsin's North Woods, is a special kind of cryptid. It's local to the town of Rhinelander, in the northern part of the state, and its story grew from the tales told around the fires at the area's many logging camps. The creature is known as the Hodag, and according to legend, it was born out of the ashes of a cremated lumber ox. This Hodag was the same color as the ox it had come from and possessed its strength, along with attributes from other forest animals as well. It was not something to be trifled with in the forest on a dark night. Now, historians believe the word Hodag comes from old lumberjack slang. It could relate to the term for a kind of gardening hoe, or maybe a pickaxe. Although, based on pictographs discovered on the shores of Lake Superior, it's possible the Hodag might be connected to Mishipeshu, the Ojibwa water panther. The Hodag was first spotted by a local man named Gene Shepard, who worked in the logging industry in 1893. His job was known as timber cruising, or land looking. He was like a baseball scout, except instead of up-and-coming players, Shepard evaluated areas of land based on how much money could be made from harvesting the trees for lumber. But it does need to be said that any story coming from him was going to be a problem, because Shepard was also known as the P.T. Barnum of northern Wisconsin. He was something of a prankster, having once tried peddling a rare scented moss that turned out to be nothing but regular moss that he had sprayed with perfume. He also owned a hotel where he had rigged a fake leaping fish in the nearby lake to convince anglers that it was fully stocked. So his claim of having witnessed a Hodag probably wasn't something that people were quick to accept. He described it as having the body of a dragon, with fearsome fangs lining its mouth and 6 horns protruding from its back. It also smelled like a combination of skunks and rotting meat, and according to one newspaper article from 1893, its tail was covered in, and I quote, "the most deadly hooks imaginable." But maybe Shepard wasn't so far off the mark. The same article also reported how some locals took up arms against the creature and ventured into the woods to hunt it down. They grabbed their rifles and, according to the article, and I quote, "large-bore squirt guns loaded with poisonous water." And then they tracked the beast down to a tamarack swamp. With the Hodag cornered, the hunters released their bravest dogs, which were of course quickly torn to pieces. The men then shot at the beast until their guns overheated, at which point they pulled out their knives, as well as several sticks of dynamite in the hopes of killing it once and for all. They didn't have much luck in exterminating it though, they only angered it further. In a rage, the Hodag started knocking down trees around the hunters, while its breath turned into black tar coal smoke. And that smoke, plus the stench of the dog's remains, mixed together, creating an unholy fog of death. But eventually the hunters prevailed and successfully burned the hodag to death after an exhausting 9-hour battle. They dragged its charred carcass back to town in victory. 3 years later, Gene Shepard returned and brought with him an even more outrageous claim. Not only had he spotted another hodag, but he had captured it alive. He blocked off the entrance to its den with large rocks before using a long stick to insert a chloroform rag into the cave, rendering the beast unconscious. For a time, Shepard told people that he'd been keeping the beast in his barn, a declaration that unsurprisingly garnered him attention, and of course, visitors. And so when people would come to his home, he would put on a nice suit and venture down to where he was keeping the hodag. His guests would listen as Shepard's screams and cries for help mingled with the creature's own growls and roars. They would hear glass breaking and wood snapping until Shepard returned, his suit ripped to shreds. He would then apologize, saying that the hodag could not be seen that day, as it was too angry. But that wasn't enough. The people demanded to see the mythical beast for themselves, and so it made sense that Shepard would capitalize on its popularity by bringing it to local fairs where he could charge admission for folks to see it. At the Oneida County Fair, for example, Shepard put the hodag on display in a tent, requesting that fairgoers leave their dogs at home for fear of them tempting the hodag into eating them. And what people saw there was chilling. The hodag that Shepard had captured measured 7 feet long and 30 inches high. Its skin was black and covered in horns, 2 on its head and another 12 on its back, and on the ends of its short legs were long, sharp claws. According to Shepard, the hodag only ate on Sundays and subsisted on a diet of white bulldogs. It also laid 13 eggs at a time from which its young hatched. Unsurprisingly, nobody stayed in the tent for too long. Shepard was always quick to move them out, for fear of their own safety, he said. But that wasn't the true reason. It was because his hodag wasn't real. It was a wood sculpture carved by an artist named Luke Dearney, and it had been covered in old smelly hides from a local tannery and was operated by his son like a puppet to frighten the fairgoers. Shepard would go on to use his hodag in a staged photograph recreating that legendary capture, but all he really did was show how absurd the whole charade turned out to be. But that still hasn't stopped locals from spreading and even buying into the hodag lore. After all, we all need excuses to blame for our problems. And what's better than a monster? Every corner of our world seems to have a monster, and every monster has a story to go along with it. Like I mentioned earlier, the hodag's wild origin is tied to the burning of a lumber ox. If tall tales and oxen sound familiar, then it should come as no surprise that the hodag legend eventually became intertwined with one of the most famous lumberjack stories of all time, Paul Bunyan. In the 1920s, Gene Shepard wrote a series of stories about Paul Bunyan and his faithful blue ox, Babe. In fact, Shepard would sometimes claim to be the originator of all Bunyan stories, and one historian, Michael Edmonds from Wisconsin, thinks this might actually be one of the few true things that Shepard ever said. The earliest Bunyan stories appear to have emerged from Wisconsin logging camps in the 1880s, while a young Eugene Shepard was working in the area, and the first stories about the giant lumberjack were recorded not far from his camp. They'd been told by a man named Bill Mulholland during the winter of 1885. Now, we don't know for certain whether Shepard and Mulholland ever met, but it's likely, and they would have run in the same circles. And one of the stories that Bill liked to tell was about Paul Bunyan using a moose to pull his sled. Now, a moose-driven sled might sound fantastical, but the funny thing about this tale is that it was true, and it happened to Gene Shepard. In 1896, he apparently had a pair of moose brought to Wisconsin from Minnesota for the purpose of pulling his carriage. Once they'd been trained, he had postcards made of him in the driver's seat, the 2 moose up front ready to go. And he even claimed that they were faster than any horse-drawn carriage, even though he never actually proved it. The first Bunyan stories appeared in print in the Duluth News-Tribune in 1904, around the time that Shepard retired, and the legend has only grown ever since. Some claim that Paul Bunyan hunted down and killed all the hodags with a special 8-inch claw, which he used as a toothpick. Others say that the original hodag was formed from the flaming corpse of Bunyan's faithful ox, which burned for 7 long years, only to transform into the legendary beast. Today, no one knows for sure, But Gene Shepard has been the one person at the center of it all for the last 130 years. Sadly, his days of telling tales are long gone. But the monsters? They'll be here forever.
Bro. When two snipers point
like I said before, monsters are everywhere you look. From the forests of Europe to the woods of America's heartland, there seems to be a creature for every community. Which is why it was so hard to pick the ones we discussed today. Thankfully, we've got time for one more tale. And this one has some teeth to it. Stick around through this brief sponsor break to hear all about it. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing right before bed or at other inopportune moments? I have been there so many times before myself, so I know exactly how it feels to get stuck in those moments. But it turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy gives you a place to do that, so you can get out all of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you need to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lore today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.
Wait, how did you know I was that wrong?
Because you said you were getting it. Very bad. Yeah, you did. I said, are you getting Modern Warfare 3, right?
I said maybe. I said maybe.
I was just guessing, really. I probably was gonna be. I need like one, two, or three more kills to just chop her.
You didn't guess. You didn't guess.
Probably Assassin's Creed 4 on.
The newer one?
Yeah. I'm gonna get my chopper gunner and then we're gonna
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm gonna get the chop. Yup, uh-huh.
Why do you have to push these?
What? Because I forgot my controller. Look at my gun. It's like a Nerf gun. Got an update and it's like 1,000 gigabytes.
You smell. You know that, right? I smell. How's my armpits?
I'm back. But I think I'm gonna get off.